It's usually one person who changes the course of history, emancipates a nation, unfetters his people, and carves out a nation-state for them. They call him a leader, le dirigeant, Amir. In Pakistan, they call him Quaid-e-Azam, the greatest leader. For them, he is Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He won the battle of freedom for the Muslims of India and created a homeland for them, Pakistan. In 1909, a young Indian Muslim lawyer is dubbed the Ambassador of Hindu-Muslim Unity in British India.
By whose authority are you using force? Can I see the magistrate's order?
My advice, Mr. Jinnah, is to go back.
Stop this slaughter. No!
Pull the men back.
40 years later, the same man, now physically emaciated by tuberculosis, is painted as responsible for killings of millions of Hindus and Muslims in the bloodbath that follows the partition of India. Revered and reviled, reproached and respected, Muhammad Ali Jinnah is one of the great figures of the anti-colonial movements that ended the British Empire. Along with Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, Jinnah forms the holy trinity of the independence of India and Pakistan. But the irony is that hardly anyone outside the Indian subcontinent has ever heard of this brilliant barrister who became the Quaid-e-Azam, supreme leader, to the millions whose freedom he came to personify.
We must remember that we have to take momentous decisions and handle grave issues facing us in this solution.
Jinnah's charisma and his uncanny debating prowess were his entry into the world of Indian nationalist politics in the early part of this century. He joined both the Hindu-dominated Indian Congress Party and the then more recently formed Muslim League, working to bring the two bodies together to agree in 1916 on a common demand for Indian independence. The years immediately after the end of the First World War saw the rise to prominence of Mahatma Gandhi as the leader of the Indian independence movement. Jinnah's belief in using constitutional means to rid the subcontinent of the British conflicted with Gandhi's tactics of direct non-violent action.
I welcome the fact that Mr. Jinnah speaks of dignity. India has an ancient, unshakable dignity and an ancient spirit, a force of spiritual strength which has been suppressed for too long. But when it is released, this shining light of truth, of ahimsa, which is non-violence, and satyagraha, which is the ancient path of truth, no force on earth, no constitutional game will be able to suppress it.
But more importantly, Jinnah was not convinced by the idea of Hindu-Muslim unity. For him, the danger of a Muslim minority being swamped by a Hindu majority in such an arrangement were too obvious. Gandhi's utopian view of these two communities living harmoniously struck Jinnah as perilously naive. Disillusioned with Gandhi's apparent success and distraught by the death of his young wife, Jinnah left India in 1931 to engage in a legal practice in London. But his instincts as a politician pulled him back 4 years later. 1935 also witnessed elections for provincial assemblies in British India. The Congress Party, under Jawaharlal Nehru, made spectacular gains, winning majorities in 6 of the 11 provinces of India. At this point, the Muslim poet-philosopher Muhammad Iqbal wrote to Jinnah, advising him to turn the Muslim League into a party representing the Muslim masses, and to demand the creation of a free Muslim state. Between 1936 and 1945, Jinnah campaigned tirelessly to bring Muslims into the fold of the League, accusing the Congress of being blatantly anti-Muslim. Jinnah's stance on the question of a separate homeland for the Muslims wasn't put forward formally until 1940, when, in an address to the annual meeting of the Muslim League, he put forward the idea of Hindus and Muslims as two distinct nations, existing within the boundaries of British India. If the British government are really earnest and sincere to secure the peace and happiness of the people of this subcontinent, the only course open to us all is to allow the major nations separate homelands by dividing India into autonomous national states, he said. Jinnah stuck with using constitutional means to achieve his objectives until 1946, despite being faced with three formidable foes: Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru, and the British Viceroy, Louis Mountbatten. Mountbatten had been seduced by Nehru's urbane charm and Mahatma Gandhi's spiritual garb. In his brief time as Viceroy, Mountbatten proved to be Jinnah's and Pakistan's most implacable foe.
All right, Bapuji. What would he say if I told him that Gandhi had made the offer?
He would say, wily old Gandhi.
In August 1946, Jinnah, the upright British-trained barrister, bade farewell to his constitutional struggle and urged Muslims to start a campaign of direct action to achieve their object of an independent homeland. Jinnah's conviction was based on the victories of the League in the Assembly elections of 1945 to 1946. This day, we bid goodbye to constitutional means, he declared.
We have swept the polls throughout India. Will of the people has put Pakistan within our grasp.
Muslims throughout India answered his call and confronted the British in demonstrations across the country. Young Muslims, men and women, were at the forefront of this campaign. Thousands were imprisoned by the authorities. Confronted by the strength of support for Pakistan's creation, Mountbatten relented and agreed that India would have to be partitioned. But even now, Jinnah was to be confronted by treachery. Kashmir, a Muslim-majority state, was handed over to India without any consultation with its people. 5 decades later, Kashmiris are still fighting for the right to decide their own future. Jinnah lived for just over a year after Pakistan's birth on August 14, 1947. In the years leading up to partition, he'd been diagnosed with tuberculosis. That disease now claimed his life. Jinnah's journey from advocate of Hindu-Muslim unity to Pakistan's founder came about through his reassessment of the relations between the two great faith communities of the subcontinent. His role in the history of partition has been portrayed as that of the calculating and stubborn obstacle in the way of a united India. His vision and leadership probably saved the subcontinent from several bloodbaths on the scale that occurred at partition. Jinnah's story is one of the most engaging of this century. It is the story of the birth of a nation. In 1997, Pakistanis are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the creation of their country. But for most Pakistanis, the founder of their country has become a remote figure who they encounter only in grim-faced portraits. The caricature of a cold, unfeeling, calculating man is now the prevalent image of Jinnah. For one Pakistani academic, the key to understanding what his country is all about lies in the figure of Jinnah. Akbar Ahmed a fellow of Cambridge University and one-time Pakistani civil servant, embarks on producing a feature film on his country's founder. Ahmed's avowed aim is to humanize Jinnah, to take Jinnah off Pakistan's office walls and bring him onto the world's cinema screens.
I believe as a Muslim and as a Pakistani that Mr. Jinnah's story is such a brilliant story to counter this image that it serves several purposes. It's a tribute to Mr. Jinnah, a long overdue tribute. It's a lesson for the younger generation. We know all about Mr. Jinnah who created Pakistan. It's also, in a sense, taking on and countering the negative image of Mr. Jinnah in a film like Gandhi. So Atin Bara's Jinnah is challenged by our Jinnah. And finally, it fits into this global debate. We are able to say that throughout this Muslim world, we have great people like Mr. Jinnah, who really are extraordinary and who can take on any world leader on any level and give us a sense of pride, a sense of identity and pride.
Ahmed believes that by escaping the stranglehold of the orthodox view on Jinnah, he can give the people of Pakistan back the leader they never knew they had, and at the same time introduce a new visionary to the world's cinema audiences. It's an ambitious task. Ahmed gathers a cast and crew of international renown. The Jinnah crew had been in Pakistan for a few days when stories questioning the project began appearing in the press. Every aspect, from the authorship of the script, to the choice of director, to casting decisions, to the finance of the film, became a target for rumour, scandal and innuendo. Pakistan's notoriously weak libel laws meant that the press could publish anything it liked with impunity. One paper, the News International, became the focus for the game of Chinese whispers that dogged the production. It was said that Salman Rushdie, a figure not far removed from Satan in Pakistani minds, had written the script. Christopher Lee's horror film pedigree was cited as a reason for his unsuitability for the main role. And the News even printed a story claiming that Shashi Kapoor, the famous Indian actor cast in a supporting role, had decided to put £1 million of his own money into the project. The last of these stories tied up several conspiracy theories in one neat package. Shashi Kapoor, an Indian Hindu whose role in the film was alternately portrayed as Jinnah's interrogator and tormentor, was now said to be bankrolling the film. Jinnah had been auctioned to the anti-Pakistan lobby.
This is ridiculous. This is just some maniac writing all this. When they wrote about me and my family, they brought my father also into this, and they said we were the enemies of Pakistan. We weren't, we've never been. The overall reaction of the local people was overwhelming. The love and affection that I have been used to in all my years in India, it was given to me, I think, in the double. I mean, like one day I'm sitting, thank God I wasn't shooting that day, and suddenly a call comes from the governor's house saying that the Prime Minister would like to meet with you. So come now. So I quickly ran and then got hold of Akbar Saab, and we both rushed to the governor's house. Thank God, again, it was bang opposite our hotel. So we went there, and there was the Prime Minister's house. We sat with him, I had a cup of tea and chatted, and Mian Nawaz Saab behaved as though he had known me for a long, long time. And he'd seen my films, which I had done in my younger days. And we chatted very nice. And he said, why don't you come over as my guest to Islamabad? And you're from Peshawar, your family's from Peshawar, go to Peshawar. And they made all the arrangements, and I had a lovely time.
Jamil Delvi, the film's director, was also placed under a cloud. Delvi's previous efforts making films about Pakistan, Blood of Hussein and Immaculate Conception, had marked him out as being anti-Pakistani in the eyes of some self-appointed guardians of the country's honour.
Well, the fact that I'm Pakistani, that it's my culture, I'm making a film about Pakistan, about the struggle of a man who created a country against all odds. I also have a certain background in international filmmaking, which I think was necessary for a project like this.
Jamil knows the territory, he's a Pakistani, and in some senses, if he could make a film that would be acceptable and respected abroad and in Pakistan, he would also be redeeming himself and his own image as someone who's not favorable to Pakistan or seen to be anti-Pakistan in Pakistan.
Also, a project like this was inevitably going to be controversial, and that's not something that's new to me.
Many of these items would appear bylined by our special correspondent, but the film crew were convinced that this was shorthand for Imran Aslam, the editor of the paper's Karachi edition.
Fact remains that this is a national issue in Pakistan, and it should be treated like that and should not be trivialized. The whole tone and tenor of the script frightened me, because I knew that this was not a sort of film that would be made in Pakistan. Who's written the script? Why is there so much secrecy about it? Jamil Dehelvi's past has also been negative, in the sense that he's made films which are what I would call films that are made by masochistic Paki bashers. Okay? Negative aspects have been taken into account about Pakistan.
A Paki basher. What is a Paki basher? I mean, I don't see myself in that way at all. On the contrary, I make films about. I keep going back to Pakistan to make films. If I wanted to be a Paki basher, I would hardly do that.
I mean, Christopher Lee is a great actor. No problems with him. He's a fantastic actor. But the public response is, why do you want to have a person who has always played negative roles, and especially is identified so closely with Dracula, to now be asked to play the role of Jinnah? I find that in bad taste.
If somebody wants to rake up the fact that 40 years ago I played Count Dracula, and the last time was 26 years ago, if they want a list of the films that I've done in the last 26 years, I've got it. And if they can find the films, they can look at all of them and they realize what nonsense this is, that it is ludicrous. Because if you carry this a bit further, and you say Christopher Lee shouldn't be playing Muhammad Ali Jinnah because he once played Dracula, which people have said, they don't do their homework. It's typical journalistic sloppiness. There's no question about that. If people say that, well then what are they going to say about Anthony Hopkins? The Americans are going to say he shouldn't play President Nixon. The Spaniards are going to say he shouldn't be playing Picasso. He made his name playing a serial killer.
Aslam's audition for the role of Jinnah in the film had been turned down, and some of the crew detected a whiff of petty envy.
The flowers are so sweet, Jin.
They're from my garden. I plucked them myself.
You mustn't do that.
For you, I can. You can come home and pluck them yourself.
I have no pretensions of being an actor at all. I'm the editor of a very large newspaper. There's a tremendous amount of responsibility there. But that is when the investigations into what actually was happening with the film began. And of course the allegations are that I did this out of pique because I wasn't given the role. All I can say about that is something I wouldn't even like to dignify.
When you unleash these dark forces, when you call forth these dark forces, obviously it's not going to stop there. Something has to give. How are we going to stop it? How are we going to stop this flood?
I mean, you can walk in there and get the shock of your life by suddenly seeing this actor who you've seen, who you don't probably know the name of, but you've seen perform all these roles, and you could get the shock of your life and walk out of there and say, this fellow should creep back into the coffin where he belongs, with a stake through his heart.
Despite the fact that none of these stories were accurate in any way, no paper in Pakistan deemed it fit to print corrections, never mind apologies.
We are telling the truth in this film. Do any of you have any objection to telling the truth? To read that he is anti-Islam, anti-Muslim, anti-Jinnah, anti-Pakistan is a disgrace. There's no other word for it. To read that the director is a man of ill repute is a disgrace. I have, quite frankly, never come across so many blatant untruths as there have been in certain sections of the press in this country.
The media-instigated controversy was picked up by others. One retired army officer tried to get an injunction banning the film, alleging that Jinnah was being defamed by it. The hearing gave two men directly associated with Jinnah the chance to counter some of the bad press. Liaquat Merchant, a direct descendant of Jinnah, and Syed Sharifuddin Pirzada, who served as Jinnah's aide, both prominent lawyers, defended the filmmakers.
We learnt one fine day from the newspapers that somebody had filed a petition in the High Court in exercise of the constitutional jurisdiction, a person by the name of ex-Major L.K. Bhatti. And the court had issued notices to Professor Akbar Ahmed, Mr. Christopher Lee, Mr. Shashi Kapoor, and all the rest. And there was apparently a challenge not only to the film, but the very fact about the history being recorded. And the allegation was that the film producers and directors were distorting history, and a number of other serious allegations were made, both against the producer, the director, and the cast.
And he says the script must be scrutinized carefully, and such a film should not be allowed to be produced. It will not present the proper personality of Mr. Jinnah, and many other irresponsible allegations were made therein.
At this point, I may tell you that had the petition been admitted by the High Court for hearing and a stay had been granted restraining the film from being produced in Pakistan, it would have been disastrous for the producers, the director, and the entire project, the film project itself. It may have collapsed in between, and that would have been the end of the film.